Okay. Hello, everyone. So this will be the lecture part for this week's readings. So that's one of the letters Marx wrote to Rouge, and his very well-known article on the Jewish question, which is a reply, of course, to Bruno Bauer. Both are written in 1843. So at this point, Marx is, remember, only 25 years old. So let's not be too hard on him. As a 25 years old, he already really offered a criticism of liberalism that is profound, that is still very rich and very inspiring, and I think in many ways very valid today. But before we do that, let me just go over a few ideas there. I mean, I'm going to confess to you that every time, sometimes more than once a year, definitely more than once a year, but every time, so by once I mean maybe 5, 6 rereading of the text for the same occasion. But every year I read it, there are new things or new kind of corners to discover. So what I will say is my reading at the moment. Feel free to raise questions, disagree, or whatnot. That about what I'm saying. What I've just said is more about the article on the Jewish question. So I'll just go back a minute and again to Hegel. So and that's Hegel's, especially the philosophy of history, and the source that I will be referring to is right here. I'm going to share it with you. I mean the bibliographical information is now in the chat area. So Hegel, that book is based on a series of lectures he gave in a course which he taught several times, and in that course he is perhaps, and therefore in the book, as clear as Hegel could be, I think, compared to his other works like Logic and so on. But his interpretation, his reading of history is very interesting. It is still definitely problematic in many ways. But I'll just give you an example of, because remember, a few weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, I was saying how Hegel approached, for example, Protestants versus Catholics versus Muslims, and in terms of progression towards what? Towards the realization of idea in that very particular Hegelian sense, towards basically rationality, perfect, the perfect embodiment or realization of reason in history, because that is the telos of history, if you will. And of course, to him, it is the Protestants who form a religion that is most compatible with modernity. I mean, he's still speaking, remember, as someone who has faith in the Enlightenment project. But what does he say about others? I'll just read a quote for you from page 446. He says, leaving this abstract form of subjectiveness, we have now to consider the secular side. And I'm sharing with you this because it is relevant to what will come in Marx. Leaving this abstract form of subjectiveness, we have now to consider the secular side, the constitution of the state, and the advance of universality, the recognition of the universal laws of freedom. This is the second and the essential point, he says. 100 about on 374 in the same book, quote, the Muhammadian, or I'm pronouncing it wrong because it is written as Mohammedan, but you know what it means. Otherwise, it means Muslims at that point in that language at that time. But let's say the Mohammedan religion originated among the Arabs, he said. Here, spirit with capital S, here spirit exists in its simplest form, and the sense of the formless has its special abode. For in their deserts, nothing can be brought into firm, consistent shape. Tell me about Orientalism. So that's the quote. So he's basically saying Muslims, and he goes on, it is more than that. He goes on to say that those people just can't have concepts, let's say. You know, they're not able of abstraction, thought in that sense. In fact, he does say on the same page, and this is the final quote I will read from Hegel, quote, abstraction swayed the minds of the Mohammedans. The object was to establish an abstract worship, and they struggled for its accomplishment with the greatest enthusiasm. So you see what's happening there. It is the point I was talking about, but it is also, he's talking about how even the role of religion, with the role of religion, like how much abstraction happened. Okay, because you see the Hegelian influence, of course, in Feuerbach later, even in his critique. If you want, I can share these three quotes with you also. Are you interested? Okay, yeah, I will just, here they are with the page numbers in the chat section now. Okay, let's move on then. But you remember we talked about the essence of Christianity by Feuerbach and what's happening, and how Feuerbach thinks human beings, human beings have their consciousness as a limitless force, as a force that does not recognize any limits for its discoveries, let's say, for its objects, and then at some point it confused that to a separate supernatural being that is God, and so on and so forth. Okay, but what happens with Marx then? Because with Feuerbach, remember, it's consciousness versus what? Even in his earlier writings, which we didn't read for this course. For Feuerbach, it's consciousness versus instinct. Humans are humans because they have consciousness, this supernatural power, or almost supernatural power. But the other animals have instinct. That means they have some form of knowledge, but it is not consciousness. It's something else. In other words, you don't see a cat sitting there and just thinking about the meaning of catness. Well, that's the claim. Maybe a cat does. I mean, most of the time, I think cats do that better than us, maybe. But let's see. Let's move on. So what happens then with Marx? 1843, both texts. So let's talk a little bit about about the first one, the letter to Rouge. There, look at this. I'll just read a few quotes again for you, and I will make my point. So we do not anticipate the world with our dogmas, but instead attempt to discover the new world through the critique of the world. So this is very profound here, because remember, he's also criticizing. I will share the quote with you. Don't worry, it's here. So that one is from the letter. So here, what he's saying is it's part of also that critique of the communists, that the point is actually the critique of what exists. You can't have just another unfounded, ungrounded utopia and claim that is communism. And he goes on later, he says, reason has always existed, but not always in a rational form. So you see, there's still a lot of Hegel present here. And again, this is written in 1843. Both texts were published in the following year, but they were both written in fall of 1843. Okay. Reason has always existed, but not always in the rational form. So basically, history is a move towards that rational form of reason. Yeah, and he said he writes in the letter, the final goal implicit in the actual forms of existing reality. He can deduce a true reality. So we being human being. So the critic can deduce the true reality from the existing reality. This is profound. So this is Marx, about to be released to the world. If you are interested, the title I chose for my lecture notes today, was Marx and Liberalism, or the beginning of the Marxist philosophy. So here's the beginning of Marx, the Marxist Marx. That basically the critic, by criticizing the existing reality, deduces a true reality. Still Hegelian, but only later we will know what that means and why that matters. Now, he says, as far as real life is concerned, it's precisely the political state. Are you paying attention? The political state, it is highlighted in the translation at least. It is precisely the political state which contains the postulates of reason in all its modern forms. So, and that is Hegel. Okay, you don't need to read Hegel for this course, but that is coming still from Hegel. So it is not easy to get the critique, or the basic ideas in the critique from the first reading of the letter and the article. Okay, so I'll just move on. One more point, also in the same passage, it consistently assumed that reason. So let's see. So the state consistently assumed that reason has been realized, and just as consistently it becomes embroiled at every point in a conflict between its ideal vacation, so the ideal vacation of the state, and its actually existing premises, right? So there is a contradiction between the actual premises of the state, what it presumes already, and its role, its ideal role, what it claims. So let's keep in mind this as well. Later he says, and this is very good. This is very important for what's coming. Just as religion is the table of contents of the theoretical struggles of mankind, so the political state enumerates its practical struggles. But here, that you can read this in two different ways. You could say, oh, so he's actually then agreeing with Feuerbach, because that's what Feuerbach says. Feuerbach says religion is important to tell us about us. But we already read Marx, who said, yes, that was writing late from 1845, where he says, look, to Feuerbach, you don't need to go upstairs to look downstairs to understand downstairs. Why don't you just stay downstairs? Like, why do you, in other words, why do you need to consider religious consciousness, theology, in order to understand consciousness better? You don't even need to do that, right? But here, what is he saying? Is Marx still a little bit of a Hegelian idealist then? He says, we shall not say, abandon your struggles, yeah? We shall not say, abandon your struggles, but then he says, we want to simply show the world why it struggles, yeah? Okay. So basically what he's saying is that then by looking into the human consciousness, we want to make consciousness aware of itself. Yeah, so more or less. But that is still, that's still quite Feuerbachian. In fact, he does say, like Feuerbach's critique of religion, our whole aim can only be to translate religious and political problems into their self-conscious human form. Right? So, because he says, quote, the reform of consciousness consists entirely in making the world aware of its own consciousness, as I was saying. So is this Feuerbachian? Yes. Reform of consciousness seems to be the goal, but no, he doesn't stop there. Also, let's be careful. I mean, the whole point of Marx is not to treat any text as sacred in the sense that it has all truth there, codified and packaged and so on for us to discover. So this is a letter, after all, and he is and he wrote other letters to the same person and many other letters to others. But it was published, but we can't make that kind of theological assumption again that since all these texts are coming from the same entity, therefore they have to be compatible somehow. But let's move on now on the Jewish question. I know it has already been 18 minutes. So okay, I promise maybe around another 18 or 20 minutes maximum. Okay, so Bauer's solution because Bauer wrote this article, The Jewish Question. Yeah, and Marx's article is on the Jewish question, so this lecture is on the Jewish question. But we have to go back, like Marx, to the main question, the Jewish question. What is Bauer? What is Bruno? So Bruno Bauer, left Hegelian, young Hegelian, very, happy about his what he called critical critique and all that, and actually the Prussian state considered Bauer and people like Bauer, other Hegelians, a threat on the state. So that's why I was saying 1844 was a dark year for the leftists and liberals and so on, because then the Hegelians were pushed out of universities, and Bruno Bauer is one of those people. Okay, so Bruno Bauer wants to address the Jewish question, but Marx says, okay, his his answer is in the question. In basically, he's saying, so Bauer is saying, this is not a real question. It's not a genuine question. So Bauer asks a question to say this is not a good question. We should just forget about it. Basically, that's what's happening there. That's why Marx says Bruno Bauer brings up questions and then answer and provides answers that are not answers to that question. So he answers questions he hasn't asked, actually. But basically, it comes down to this, that the Jewish question is not a genuine one. Why does he think that? Well, then Marx explains with the quotes from Bruno Bauer that what does the Jew mean by emancipation? As a human being, well, that is all of us. If the Jew wants emancipation, then it must be the emancipation of all. As a Jew, well, that seems to be contradictory, because how could we emancipate the Jew if we are not emancipated, and so on and so forth? So that means basically what he's doing is the state has to be secular. I'm going to put it in today's simple language. The state has to be secular, and we can take it from there. But the Jew also, by virtue of asking for Jewish emancipation, is actually not capable, Bruno Bauer thinks, not capable even of being emancipated, right? That is the problem from Bruno Bauer's point of view, because in order to be emancipated, you have to act like this universal citizen, secular citizen, aware of citizens' rights and the role of the state and all that. And it seems the Jewish person, by virtue of being Jewish, contradicts that position, that progressive emancipatory position of the state and of the Enlightenment. So you would think, what is Marx's problem with that then? Marx thought, okay, to put it very simply, like others, but in a different way, like Hegel, like Feuerbach, Bruno Bauer is repeating the mistake of idealism. Okay, now this needs a little more unpacking. Why? Because Bruno Bauer thinks that the emancipated state, the secular democratic liberal state, is basically the ultimate point of emancipation. That's the first thing that Marx thinks. That is a false assumption entirely. Political emancipation is good. It's not enough, though. In fact, it creates its own misleading results there. How? So let's look into that. If the issue is emancipating the state from the Christian domination, okay, now that sounds, on the surface, it sounds okay. But what is happening is the state, basically the so-called Christian state, is not even Christian. It cannot be Christian. Simple, Marx says. What happens is theologization of politics and politicization of religion. Yeah? Now, I mean, look at the Iranian state, or the Islamic Republic of Iran, or the Islamic Republic of Pakistan, or any theocracy. What's happening? They politicize religion and theologize politics, which means two disasters, however you look at it. Right? So this is Marx's point at here. But it's not just that simple, that straightforward. He says we do not turn secular questions into theological ones. This is Marx. Because Bruno Bauer actually turns secular questions to theological ones. Right? Because emancipation, the whole issue, like Jewish question, any other question, is a secular question, but he looks at them from a theological point of view. Because why? Because he reduces the Jew to only a theological Jew, like a believer. Yeah? And that is a problem. So what are you doing? So, is the problem is Bruno Bauer or the Jewish question? To Marx, it's actually Bruno Bauer. And this Bruno Bauer, the liberal, the progressive, and so on. Okay. And Marx goes on and says history has done a lot of that, a lot of that kind of superstition, merging superstition in history, he says. But what we need to do is like a history of those superstitions, like contrary of that move. Yeah. So the contradiction between the state and religion in general as the contradiction between the state and its presuppositions in general. Okay, now, so we are getting closer to why the state carries on some of those problems, some of that idealism and so on. So he literally says the state is the intermediary between man and man's freedom. But that was exactly the problem with religion itself. Huh? Because religion is that intermediary or that kind of medium through which we're supposed to reach what? Reach happiness, freedom, justice, and so on and so forth. But precisely because of claiming that role, it actually pushes us back. It prevents our emancipation, yeah, and our progress and so on. And that's exactly the problem with state too, because it is only people like Bruno Bauer who assume that political emancipation is basically the ultimate emancipation. Okay, let's see so why is that a problem? Who's Bruno Bauer anyway in today's language? Liberalism. It's liberalism. It's liberalism that says all citizens are equal under the law in the state. And Marx says, aha, okay, that's good, but there is a problem. You are assuming that everything in the society, we are born into a world with whatever, with wealth, without wealth, with skin color that is privileged or underprivileged. You assume all this is in a natural level. All this is fine. And you sell this to us as equality, right? So that's why, remember, he says, it is not freedom from property that the state gives. Yeah? But that applies to everything else that the state presumes. So ideally, it claims that kind of a perfect medium, but in reality, no, it actually naturalizes because it presupposes all those inequalities. And that is the problem also with its position from religion, its secularism. Right? So the relation of the political state to civil society is just, I'm quoting Marx, just as spiritual as the relation of heaven to earth. Remember, all the things that are attributed to God. Now, state does the same thing. Not just to pretend a position, but actually, eventually, it prevents us. It pulls us back historically. Okay, so what does he mean? Why is that the case? How can that be the case? Because the state is real, your rights are real, the laws are real. Yeah? Not quite, because the state is based on this idea, this entity. Who's the subject here? The citizen. But who's the citizen? Right? It's like the Christian or the Muslim. The Muslim under the Islamic Republic is supposedly respected, is the best, is, whatever, knows it all, and preserved. There's already a place in paradise preserved for the Muslim. But in reality, what does the Islamic State do to the Muslim? Humiliates the Muslim, tortures the Muslim, kills the Muslim, mass murders the Muslim as a real concrete human being. And this is Marx's point. There is no Muslim, there is no citizen, there is no Christian, there is no imaginary woman. There's only always the woman, a woman in certain circumstances, right? And by the way, that is also the problem, because now everyone has their own feminism. Like there is Islamic feminism, there's Christian feminism, there's whatever feminism. Oh, never mind, all the rights are given to men, but actually in reality, if you look closer, women's rights are really respected in these texts. No, they are not. Because actually, whatever the texts, let's leave that alone. We are always dealing with concrete human beings in concrete situations. So don't tell me in his heart of hearts, God actually meant well. Because that doesn't mean the citizen is an imaginary being. There is no such thing as the citizen. It's you, me, whoever else who are dealing with daily real questions. So that's why this is idealism. This is, Marx would say in simple language, this is bullshit. The citizen is bullshit language. There is no citizen. It's you and me in our real everyday lives. And he will keep coming back to this human being, the concrete individual. Yeah. The problem with the liberal discourse is that it is stuck with this idea of the human, the individual. That doesn't really exist. In fact, this liberal project, because remember, Marx was a liberal as an Enlightenment thinker. But before even staying, he just travels through liberalism. He just sees it. He doesn't spend, let's say, a day there. He realized, oh, this is absolutely not enough and self-contradictory. So he goes beyond it, right? So all these freedoms that are promised, in fact, what happens, Marx says, in multiple places throughout his philosophical journey, is that liberalism, like liberal capitalism, isolates us into monads. Monad is the word he used in this text. Into isolated monads that are actually, we come against each other necessarily, because everything is defined in terms of that monad, that isolated individual whose interests are necessarily clashing with the interests of the other individual. So this is the reality of that kind of emancipation. It is no emancipation in any sense. Okay. And he goes on. So I will let me check the time. Yeah. So okay, just a few more minutes. I think I will just make it closer to 40 minutes. So that's why I was saying then Marx's problem, Marx's critique of Bauer is in a way along the same lines of his critique of Hegel and Feuerbach, that these people claim whatever. In the case of Bauer, secularism, right, because he was a Republican and so on. Secular, and Feuerbach, and atheism. And of course, Hegel, their master, that in the name of this kind of critique, they actually, what happens is they repeat the same fallacy. They commit the same fallacy of what? Of idealism, right? And idealism in the sense that they, at least in the following sense, that they dismiss the concrete, the historical, the social, the actual, in the name of this abstracted concept, right? Now that, in another way, happens even in his later when he writes Capital, right? Because what is the main? What's one of the main lines of critique there? against, say, political economy and so on. Yeah. The people like Smith or Ricardo, Marx says, they look around in the bourgeois society and they take what they see, they abstract what they see, and they kind of eternalize it. They say this is the rule, this is almost the natural law, right? So that is idealization. That is complete dismissal of history, of the concrete, of the situation, of the geography, right? And in that sense, it is idealism. That's what Hegel did, right? And that is also now what Bauer is doing. Okay. Now there's a very difficult issue that comes up.